There it is. And here I am, Willie T, Uncle Willie, from JazzEveryone.com with Tune of the Week number 7. And man, this tune, Groovin High by Dizzy Gillespie, like screams bebop. Actually, it's really it is exemplar of all of the things that became a part of the bebop tradition, and in 1945. Let's start with the theme, which is and those two rhythms say bebop, bebop, and all of this. A lot of singers in those days started trying to sound like horns, and started doing what they call scat singing, and that's some of the syllables they used would be bebop, bebop, so dee be doo la doo dee dee da bebop, and that is again a part of the history or myth that goes along with how the name bebop was formed. Now, another thing that also represents when that rhythm, when you start syncopating on that last beat or on any one beat in a measure along, that hadn't been done. They didn't do that in the late 30s and early 40s with the swing style, the players, Lester Young and all those cats. So this was new. There was more animation. Nothing changed. There was just a lot added to this feeling of swing, which was all of the animation that double time and these bebops and this syncopation brought to the music. Now, let's talk about the melody line in this piece. This second part here, man, that was pretty hip stuff back in 1945, because what you had was here's the tune that this was written to. I'll play a little bit of that for you so you get an idea. Again, this was one of the tunes that, like How High the Moon back home in Indiana, this tune was called Whispering.
One,
it
two,
went like this.
1, 2, 3, 4.
The melody, as you can hear, was based on that half-step change in the third and fourth measure. That's the dominant E dominant seventh, but this melody, that's what Charlie Parker and all these guys were hearing, playing off of the upper part. Or actually they called it the 2 because it was the second scale step of that dominant there. And so that started getting to be a sound. In this tune it goes down just like this. And then the next one. And then the last one. And so, I mean, that was the beginning of the new sound, the 2 5s. And don't forget all of the squiddly dops. I call those the squiddly doobie and squiddly bops. And those are embellishments, chromatic embellishments. I have a whole chapter and section and lesson is one of my main principles when you start adding those to the pentatonic pairs. So anyhow, now here's another very important sound that occurred, and here it is. All right, well, if you were around in the 40s, everybody played that note, everybody went like that. And you know what that meant? Oh yeah, that was the flat 5. And that was kind of became the symbol. Like Dizzy used to stick those fingers upside down, for that was the 5 chord. And that was the flat 5. So all of this was a part of this tradition that was growing and building with the new vocabulary. And this is the Lydian sound. And man, I mean, you know, that was very hip stuff back in those days. I'll play a little bit off of that. So, I mean, that was some pretty hip stuff. A lot of the old timers, like Louis Armstrong, he hated the sound of all of this stuff, and you know, a lot of the others kind of like weren't too happy about it. Coleman Hawkins really tried to start getting in the sound and getting going, and you had players like Harry Edison that were kind of in the middle. Clark Terry, they picked up a lot of these sounds, but they never went like full-blown bebop, like Miles and Fats and all of those people. So a lot of this was being young enough and out on that scene all the time enough to pick up on that stuff and start living with it and by it. So yeah, that's it. That's the sound of the Lydian. That was maybe the 3rd tune I learned when I was about 16 and through there. And you know, there was a bunch of guys in this Air Force base that were jamming every day in Orlando there. I was selling papers out there, going out and jamming. I was already into it deep. So that's it. Now, there's one more very important concept, and I'll walk you through that one. Now that that's the end of the first 8 bars. And it took you back to the beginning of the theme again for the second 8 bars. But that was a new way of playing 1-6 or 1-2-5, or when you went down to the dominant, or some of these more traditional ways of getting back in these types of tunes. Because what this did was to put the sound of this in place. It comes off the F chord. Then instead of going to the 6th chord, it went like this. And here, then a 2 chord, then a half a step off a tonic, another 2-5, called it substitute, and so forth. So all of this stuff was happening, new sounds. The guys that were learning this were the ones that were out every night on these jam sessions at Minton's and Two Deuces and Dizzy and Bird and Monk and Fats and Miles and Kenny Durham and all of these guys that were playing, Bud Powell. But guys like, you know, like I mentioned, Harry Edison and Clark Terry. Now, they all had gigs, man. They were all out on the road. They were all working. They all, you know, were with some of the big bands, and they weren't out on that session scene. So that was a big difference. So Tune Week number 7 is all about learning the language of jazz from the tunes, like I did, and most players for, you know, they came along 40s, 50s, 60s, or any time. Chris Potter could play every Charlie Parker tune when he was 16 and 17. Roy Hargrove, he knew all of it. I mean, people, you can't get by this. You can learn a lot of it in the theory books, and you can learn a lot of it with chords and scales. but you won't find out where the bebop is until you listen to the music. That's the trick. All right, I'm going to leave that with you. There are a lot of ways to find the harmonies, and we've been going over that in some of these other ones, and I'll get back into that next week. I think I'm doing Hot House. That's another killer. All right. Peace out. Boom. Flat 5 forever. Boo doo 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 dee da da dee.